Hi everyone, Joe March here, also known as Sorcerer, and today we're going to hit a topic that is definitely controversial, no matter which side of it you end up being on, and that is the question of, is the eternity God? So what do I mean when I say the eternity? I'm talking about everything that is, everything that was, and everything that will be. I'm talking about the earth, the cosmos, the stars, the space in between, the time that exists, our imagination, everything perceived. We're talking about everything. In the past, I've referred to this as the all. I've referred to this as the one God. I've referred to this as the great mother. I've referred to this as eternity. And I've referred to this as the grand infinity. The one thing that we are all a part of. Is it God? Now, I've gone back and forth on this depending on which time in my life it's been. When I was younger, I was definitely raised in a more Christian household, and I didn't think of God in this way. As I've gotten older, this has become like a no-duh. Obviously, all that is what we would consider to be God. We are created from it, in its image. We are the very consciousness that it possesses. We are part of it. We cannot exist without it. We cannot exist beyond it. It just made sense to me, and I would call that thing God, and that was fine with me. Until now. I did have a bout of atheism for a couple of years there too, in which I didn't think of it as God, but rather just thought of it as sort of like an inert nothing. But that has changed completely. I do think of it as a grand thing that we are a part of, whether or not you call it God. But that's where we get into our question. What are we defining? Why would I use the word God to define this thing? And is it appropriate? And that is an investigation that I've done recently due to two different interactions that I've had online. One of those interactions was with Thomas Leroy, who is the head of the sect of the Horn God. He specifically said in a recent video, please leave questions for me on this video in the comments section if you're someone who regularly watches me and has honest questions. And I thought about that and said, yeah, I do have two. There are two different places in his philosophy that don't match mine. Since he asked for questions and he wanted legitimate questions, I was like, here's two places where we disagree. And one of those places we disagree is on whether connecting to a God is something you can do as a member of the left-hand path. So I simply asked him this question. I consider myself left-hand, but I practice connection to the all, which I view as God in a sense. Because I see the all and the self as one. You've mentioned those on the left typically don't seek union in this way, but in my case, where the all is the primal nature and creative chaos, are my acts of union any different than your work with your quote-unquote inner demon? And this question was not meant to be like a, hey, I think this, you think that, fix your thinking type of thing. It was legitimately a, why do we have this difference? Why am I okay with this connection, but everything I get as a result of the connection matches up with things that he'll talk about, like the Order of Leviathan, for example, which very similarly matches my interactions with Tiamat. Is it okay to interact with a god in this way and seek union with the all as a member of the left-hand path? Because most people who are in the left view it as union with God as a negative thing. And I thought, hey, I'll throw that question and another question, which is not important to this video, up there for him. And if he answers it, great. If he doesn't answer it, who cares? It really doesn't affect my thoughts on him at all. It's just if I was a YouTuber, which I am, and I asked for questions, which I do sometimes, and someone had a good question, I would want them to put it in there. And I was like, I think this is a good question. I think he can work with this to make a video. But since posting that, my brain hasn't let this question go. It hasn't been obsessing about what he's going to say, but rather if I've been missing something all along. And that thing is this very simple point. This is the question that popped into my head like an irritating earworm the instant I posed this question to someone else. And that is, do I call the all, the eternity, whatnot, God, when that is not the appropriate term for it? Because if I were to simply just call it the eternity and say, hey, I like to connect to the eternity as a part of my practice, nothing about that goes against the left-hand path principles that he talks about. It's only because I'm calling it God that it goes against the principle. So this little thought popped in my head of like, maybe it's just that you're calling it the wrong thing, and maybe he's right. And I was like, okay, cool, we'll wait for his video, but that thing just eats at your brain and makes you have to examine it. So, for the past week or so, I've been examining that thought. And I've been examining it in combination of just logically, but also with meditation, with journeying, with talking to what I perceive to be Tiamat and the Yal and everything that I would normally communicate with. And the answers I got gave me a lot of insight in a way that I didn't think they would. And for those who don't want to sit and hear all of the personal gnosis we're going to go into, the answer I got was that I'm incorrectly labeling this as God, but it's okay to do so. Now, the other interaction online that had a big impact on this was that I had a great conversation with a viewer of mine about the philosopher Spinoza and his views and how they're similar to mine. Now, Spinoza's views on the universe is that, similar to what I've always said, it is God, that nature, the chaotic primal, what you can see when you look at how the animal kingdom is to each other, what you can see in the evolution of species is God, as opposed to this like ordered creator God. And that is, of course, the take that I've always had, mostly because my interactions came through the arc of working with Tiamat. But Spinoza's views were based on reason and rationality, and if you read them, they sound a lot like a modern-day atheist views on how everything works, except for the fact that he attributes it to God. And he would say that God is the one substance from which we are all aspects of. That everything that you see is just an aspect of that one substance, and that one substance being God. It's very similar to what I believe, but there's one key difference. Spinoza thought that the God was completely indifferent to you, and there was no way for you to interact with that God in any way, shape, or form, thus making him not too dissimilar from an atheist aside from this one view. You might almost say he's calling it God without any need to do so. If he took that one thing away, he'd be an atheist. Similarly to how if I stopped calling it God, I'd be a left-hand pather, according to Thomas Leroy. During that conversation, which at the time I hadn't connected to the other conversation yet, I expressed my honest views on what the difference between what Spinoza believes and what I believe is. And I'll read it to you here. At the end of the day, my belief in God is based on personal experience, and if my experiences are to be considered true, I disagree on one point only. God is conscious and willing to communicate. It is conscious through us, and while it doesn't play favorites, our ability to connect to it grants us favor due to our very connection to it. And this is something that I've believed for a while now. My interactions with Tiamat and the explanation of the Great Mother or the Eternity or whatever we want to call it is that it is not conscious in the way that we are conscious. It is not an individual in the way we are an individual. It is always at all times all things. And so its consciousness is our consciousness. Like, it's conscious in the way that things within it are conscious and able to perceive it. So therefore, it's conscious. But it isn't conscious in the way of being able to make decisions or interact with the world or make changes in the world. It would be like making changes upon itself, and it doesn't work that way. Similar to what Spinoza says. But because of my ability or interactions with the gods, as I've been calling them, and my ability to connect to this greater all, I feel that through that connection I've gained insight into all that is. It's almost like connecting to what Jung would call the collective unconscious or collective conscious. I can't exactly remember. But the point being that there is something that you're connecting to, some greater whole, and when you connect to it, you gain a sort of understanding of that whole and your place within it that you don't have otherwise. And this is the favor of God that you can get. And through it, you're able to make better decisions. You're able to move yourself into better placement. If we were to akin this to the movie Star Wars with the Force, a Jedi can sense danger coming through the Force, but it isn't really that the Force is speaking to them like a god, it's their own ability to connect with it that is giving them this understanding. Similarly, we don't speak directly to the eternity as a being, but our ability to connect with it makes us understand things better. It makes us more aware of what's going on, and it allows us to move ourselves into better opportunity. Now, after having expressed this belief on this communication, my mind went back to the communication with Thomas Leroy and back to the question of, why are you calling it God then? And this spun me into actually looking into that very question. Because you don't think of the Force as a god, and yet the way I'm describing the eternity is more akin to the Force in Star Wars. It is something we connect to, we tap into, and then through that, we gain some kind of capability. And I realize that the reason that I think of it as a god is because of my interactions with Tiamat, which is a god. But my interactions with Tiamat, who claim to also be the Morgan and every other god I've ever interacted with, have to be questioned somewhat in whether or not calling her a god is correct. Because first of all, we've talked about in Veritas Tiamat that my method is to connect to my own subconscious. So there's a sort of alchemical wedding between the conscious and subconscious mind, and when doing that, you're able to interact with your subconscious. You can personify it, and when you do that, that subconscious is like a medium between you and the gods. The god-like essence or energy that exists can come into that medium and speak to you. But you're really speaking to yourself. You're speaking to your own subconscious. And it's always been a question of, is this a psychodrama where you are taking on the role of this god, or is there a true connection there? And the answer I've always had is, it really doesn't matter. You can view it either way, and the results are the same. You are going to take on aspects of this greater force as a result of the practice, and you are going to learn things about yourself and about the world that you wouldn't have learned if you didn't do the practice. So I've never really cared which one is true. It's part of why I'm called the Psycho-Sorcerer in the first place, because the psychological side works just as well as the spiritual side. However, the one place where that does come into question is what you're talking to really a god? Now, when I worked with the Morgan during my shadow work way back when, and longtime viewers will know what I'm talking about, the Morgan did say to me specifically, I am not a god, when I asked that question. And I think this is the only time I asked them, are you a god? And the answer I got was no, I'm more akin to what you would call fate, or destiny, or magic itself, or eternity, or free will. And that's where this word eternity has come from, because as the best way to describe what this thing is that I've been interacting with all this time. But if you think about that, this is an admission way back at the beginning that these things are aspects of the eternity. This one being, which I would later call the one God. And that the thing I'm interacting with is a force. It's an aspect. It's a concept. And not a being like me who thinks independently. And through the processes I use, what happens is that subconscious self that some may call the higher self, or some may call the holy guardian angel, or some may call their subconscious, acts as a vessel for that conceptual aspect, and then speaks to me. And the favor that I get from it, the way that I feel love from it, is my own love reflected back at me, because it is my subconscious self's love intermingled with this other force, giving me the ability to view myself through that force's eyes. And so I'm not interacting with a force that has chosen to spend time with me. I have called upon it. I have pulled the force into the spirit. Or, if this is just a psychodrama, I have taken on the aspects voluntarily of this force. I do not need the force in order to do that. And you may say you're splitting hairs here. Maybe. Or you might be like, this is just loony talk. I don't even know where you're going with this shit. But we've talked about before my method. Get into the trance state. Contact your own internal subconscious self, which I often call the teacher. Connect it to whatever force, God, etc. you want it to be connected to. Speak to that thing and have an interaction with the God itself through it. Gain aspects of that God in your subconscious self as a result, and then those integrate into the greater self after you're done. That's always been the process. If we understand that these forces are forces, that they're not acting upon us with their will, but rather the God that you're talking to is yourself looking through a new pair of eyes, having the enlightenment of this force added upon itself, we can suddenly understand that the reason these gods sound similar to each other and the reason that they're able to give us advice and seem to favor us specifically is because they are us giving us advice with this extra added element to it. And the same thing is true when you connect to the eternity. When I connect to the eternity, I do that in the way of going out into nature and expressing like an understanding that it's part of me and I'm part of it, and staring at, say, staring at a lake as the water ripples through, or staring at the air as it blows through the leaves and feeling the connection to all that is. But it's not personal except within me. I make it personal. I'm the reason that there's a personal element to it. My own spirit, my own soul, my own subconscious, my own higher self, my own holy guardian angel, that part of me that is spiritual and exists in this darker part of my mind and can only be unlocked through either an alchemical wedding or through the actual work of meditation. That part of me is changed by these things because it understands that I am not an individual from its point of view. It's more like them. But it's still attached to me. It's still me. So it has favoritism to this. It has favoritism to this person. And so when it speaks to me as someone with favoritism to me. People who hate aspects of themselves are probably more apt to interact with monstrous creatures who might try to kill them. What you find when you talk to enough occultists is that people who have bad experiences with the occult tend to have unresolved issues within themselves that are coming up as a result of that. So, why am I bringing all this up? Because I think if I simply look at this as the eternity instead of God, it actually does change my perspective on the relationship, but I think it changes it for the better. I think it's a more correct understanding of the relationship. And I get that it's scary for some people. It was kind of scary for me. And what I think is that I've answered my own question for Thomas Leroy, if he ever did answer it, which I don't know if he's planning to or not. He hasn't had another video yet. He might answer it in his own way, and it may be different than this. But I think I've already answered it, and I think it's that I am incorrectly calling this being God and acting as if it has a will that it is acting upon me, which it does not. Rather, that is the self, a larger portion of this self that we are. It is the all, as people may know it in the spiritual way. It is the eternity. It is everything that ever was. But it isn't a conscious individual, and so to act like it is inappropriate. And I don't view the afterlife as going to a place where it is an individual, like Christians would believe, or like other religions would believe. So my idea of having union with it isn't the same as someone's idea of dying and becoming one with it in that way, but rather my idea of dying and becoming one with it is that when we die, we will become part of the all once again, and there's no choice about that. That's just what happens when you die. You are worm food, and those worms are the all. And the food and the ground is the all, and your decaying body is still the all, and whatever you were will eventually become new life again. And that, to me, is my understanding of reincarnation, as opposed to the idea of having multiple lives and things like that. So my views of God and the afterlife and reincarnation are very earthbound. They're very grounded in flavorful language for us having the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, as opposed to souls going to a school in heaven and coming back and whatever. And if that were true, that'd be great. That sounds fun. But none of my interactions with these beings has ever led me to believe that that's the case. So if I am simply to not call the all God, and call it what it is, what I really believe in it, the eternity, it is the greater thing that we are a part of. But it isn't something that I serve. It isn't something that I'm beholden to. It isn't something that I need to achieve some acts in order to unite with. We all go to the same place in the end. And if I take that idea of a God out of it, then it no longer binds me to that right-hand path way of thinking of how things work. And I think that's his real point. Although, maybe it's not. I think the real point is that by calling it God, by acting as if dying and becoming one with the earth is an afterlife of sorts, we are still clinging to a right-hand path belief that makes us feel comfortable. But if we accept it as the very forces of nature that it is, and we accept that we can interact with it and gain better understandings through that, but that it does not make it, quote-unquote, God, as others believe in God, then we actually separate ourselves from the people who view it in that light, and as such have a different perspective, and that perspective itself leads towards left-hand path enlightenment. That's what I believe is going on. Now, was this a rant? A screed of craziness? Maybe. Could be. And there's plenty of people that I know who don't believe the gods are all one thing, and don't believe the gods are just forces, and don't believe the eternity is the eternity and not God, who I'm 100% fine with. I don't think people need to adopt this in order to be better people. I don't think it's necessarily all the way right either. I think it's conceptually better for me and helps me to move into what I know is the path for me. So I wanted to share it here because all these thoughts have been going on for the past week, and I've even interacted directly with Tiamat through the same processes I have before, and Tiamat's answers to this have been yes. The force that you call upon into your own teacher self is just a force, but the interaction I'm having with you, is that self and the force as one. And what you merged with when you merged with Tiamat is the combination of that force with yourself. And so what's really happened as I've merged with Tiamat is that I've accepted the chaotic natures of the world as a whole as a part of myself. And in doing that, it has made me more left-hand path-like, which is where the confusion came in. I've become more left-hand path as a result of my interactions with this God. Explain that to me. But now I sort of understand it. What I've done is connect to the Force. And the Force, it sounds like Star Wars. I've connected to this aspect of reality. And because of that, I've come to see reality with new eyes. And those new eyes have made me see that what many call the left-hand path is a more appropriate definition of how my path works, even though it's not 100%. And then as I've continued to move along this path and found things where, why do most people on the path not agree on this, and this sort of thing is happening, I'm able to see where maybe I have made mistakes in my understandings in the past and change them. This may also be not a fully formed understanding. In fact, I'm certain that it's not fully formed yet. But it is an evolution. It is a continued understanding of the very things that I work with that changes and grows as I change and grow. And that is my path. That's the real explanation of it. The path of Tiamat is the path of change, the path of transformation of the self. And that's really the adventure that I'm on. So I wanted to share it. Hopefully it made some kind of sense, because it really felt like I just rambled for who knows how long that was, a half hour maybe? I don't know. And I want to leave you with this before I end. This is what I wrote down while in trance when trying to fully understand this, and this is what kind of made sense to me, though it will sound like fanciful language. First, I decided to define the Great Mother by listing its attributes so that I could better look at it and understand for sure what I was describing. The Great Mother is described as existence, eternity, fate, breath. She is everything that ever was and ever will be. She is not just the material, but the immaterial as well. She is dream, idea, and emotion, as much as she is rock, plant, and animal. She is impartial to the events within her creation, the cosmos and its inhabitants, but experiences all that they experience and thus has a deep love for all that is. In this sense, she can be seen as all-loving, though she does not play favorites or intercede in the actions of sentient life forms. She is all-knowing in that she experiences everything that is to be experienced, since she is all things. This is not the same thing as knowing all there is to know. If her creation has not experienced the understanding of a thing, it remains unknown to her as well. She is not an individual, or a she for that matter. She exists as all things at all times, and is thus all-powerful, in the sense that all power exists as her, and she is every wielder of that power. She is equally responsible for the good, the bad, and the indifferent. She does not decide what is and is not. She is not outside of her creation, and is not an individual inside of her creation. She does not take agency to change her creation. The creation changes her as it changes itself. She does not choose favorites, though those who connect to her are able to grant favor to themselves. She does not act as a force upon others, though those who connect to her may speak to the very gods that are her aspects. She does not offer salvation or damnation, though those who believe otherwise may unwittingly cast such curses upon themselves. She is all things, and by virtue of that, she is the very memory of you, stored forever, as a part of her, long after your body rots and fades into nothing. No matter what you do, she will be as she is, and you will be as you have been for all eternity. And then my exploration with Tiamat began, which goes like this. So then, in what way is it more beneficial to see yourself as connecting to God when connecting to her, rather than connecting to the cosmos or the eternity? It is only beneficial in that it is an easier concept to perceive. If you are comfortable seeing her as the eternity, it is a much better title for describing who or what you are connecting to. If you are comfortable accepting that she is impartial and that her favor toward you exists only due to you choosing to connect to her and thus granting favor to yourself, it is a much better understanding of the dynamic between you. If you are comfortable accepting the gods, aspects of the eternity, that you can call forth are actually representations of the forces of the eternity, and that their affection for you is also simply your own affection for yourself blended with their flavor, this is a more accurate portrayal of what is occurring. In truth, you are the God. You are the one making change and acting upon the creation. She is that which you act upon. Now I know there will be people that are going to say, no, wait, you've lost your balance. You're not in the middle anymore. Oh no. And there's going to be people that are like, this is bullshit, because they're definitely in the right-hand path. And all that's fine. We all can have our own views, and I believe many paths lead to the same outcomes. But I just had to share it. It was one of those things where I was like, wow, I'm going through some major change. And who do I tell about this? And the answer always is this group of people right here. So I hope you enjoyed following me on my mad screed once again. And until next time, safe travels.